A warm welcome to everybody for our final happy hour this season. It coincides with what we've called HAPPI Awareness Week. It's also our 131st happy hour webinar since we started all those years ago as lockdown took hold. But we've got a great cast for you to look at the issues around designing for tomorrow and future-proofing in relation to our age-friendly homes. What you may not know is that over the course of this series of happy hours, we've had over 2,300 people join us as delegates. So we have escalated over the years and we're really sort of getting a great traction and people joining us both live on the day, but also watching on our YouTube channel as Sally referred to. We're delighted to be joined by Lord Best, who has long championed HAPPI, but also is the current co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group Housing and Care for Older People inquiry on intergenerational living called Creating Intergenerational Homes and Communities. And he is going to be very much our chair for today. And we are joined by Stephen Witherford, who's the co-founder of Witherford What's a Man, but probably needs no introduction after the stellar Sterling Prize that the practice won for Appleby Blue. Fiona is a dear friend and former colleague at the Department of Health, and she has recently written a blog about her experience on moving into St Bede's in Bedford, and she's happy to share some of that experience with us. Lovely to have you, Nicola, with us. Nicola Waterworth from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, very much a leading area of looking at age-friendly communities and the work of the Housing Planning and Ageing Hub in particular. And last but not least, Melissa from the Chic Project at Bristol University and a publication that's recently come out looking at collaborative housing and care in Europe. Now, we're going to move on quickly because you haven't come to hear what I have to say, but I'm going to hand over to Richard. Lord Best, over to you.
Jeremy, thank you very much. And thank you, Jeremy and colleagues at the HousingLIN for what has become a partnership with the all-party parliamentary group. I chair that jointly with Anna Dixon, the MP for Shipley, and we keep working hard with the HousingLIN. It's being very productive, the two of us together. As Jeremy mentioned, our current inquiry, we do an inquiry about every 18 months. Now, our current inquiry is on creating intergenerational communities, this intergenerational theme, which is a really fascinating and interesting dimension to housing for older people, for later living, ensuring this interaction between generations, despite the fact that we might be doing something special and exclusive for older people. Our report will come out in March of next year, so the HousingLIN will be very much part of the launch of that as well. So we'll look forward to that. Well, as Jeremy has outlined, we've got a star-studded cast of people designing for tomorrow future-proof, age-friendly homes. It's a great theme. I think that the whole HAPPI initiative has done incredibly well over the last, it's more than a decade since we launched the original HAPPI report, and we've had a series of follow-ups. And I think really this has added up to not only informing people, but inspiring people. And thank you to the HousingLIN for being part of that. But it has meant that we've got some fantastic developments up and down the country, really showcasing what can be done in terms of later living, in terms of designing for our aging population. And perhaps the new exemplar of what we should be doing and how we can succeed in getting it right is this wonderful Appleby Blue scheme, which Stephen Witherford is going to talk about. I must say, on behalf of everybody, however many we got now, 150 odd people so far. Stephen, can I extend congratulations on winning this prize of prizes, the Sterling Prize 2025, with your HAPPI designed Appleby Blue scheme for, I should say, the United St Saviour's charity down in southeast London. I had the privilege of cutting the tape and doing the opening ceremony for this wonderful scheme. And Stephen, you're going to tell us why we should be inspired by it.
Thank you, Lord Best. Right, let me see if this works okay. 1 second. Okay, does that appear clearly on the screen and can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to speak about Appleby Blue, created in collaboration with United St Saviour's charity. And this is a project that reimagines how older people might live a better later life in the city, which in this case is London. But the conditions that shape this project are present in many of our cities. Appleby Blue is a contemporary almshouse, which is the oldest form of social housing in Britain, originating over 1,000 years ago. United St Saviour's were the client and are the end operator of Appleby Blue and have been based in Southwark for almost 500 years. When Henry VIII dissolved Bankside's religious institution, the charity was formed to look after the local poor and take on roles that were previously performed by that religious community. This included maintaining the bells, but also looking after the poor. When we were appointed following an invited competitive process in 2014, the charity didn't have a fixed brief. Our research highlighted the crisis in social housing provision, where a high proportion of underoccupied existing social housing was being lived in by single older people. Incentives to move older social housing residents to the margins of the city or the coast, where land is cheaper. Those incentives have been common for a number of years now. But these policies create huge issues of displacement and disorientation, often depositing vulnerable people in areas with poorer social provision and little public transport. We were particularly struck by a study from Age UK which highlighted the impact of loneliness on older people and the links to ill health and premature death. This seemed the very opposite of the high-rise, high-density, street-centred London that we had been part of building for the previous 15 years through two mayors. We worked with a social historian, Ken Walpole, and a photographer, Philip Ebling, to help shape the proposition of the project. Ken emphasised that most models of housing for older people were forms of retreat and urged us to make this new almshouse in a way that was more connected and open to the city around it. The charity wanted to create an almshouse that responded to these contemporary social challenges, to provide high-quality homes in central London that would offer an incentive for tenants to leave the larger under-occupied family homes they'd lived in for decades, to help mitigate loneliness and support intergenerational interaction, and to nurture mutual support and a sense of purpose. Our design extends the centuries of evolution of almshouses that typically have walls or railings to the street. We're sort of in the centre bottom here, arranged in a U shape around a shared garden or court. At the centre of this accommodation would be a collective shared space, taking the form of a hall or a chapel, depending on the organisation that funded them. This is usually located furthest from the street and only serves the residents who live there. And Appleby Blue is on the bottom right. So we moved really from a model focused on the hereafter to a model focused on the here and now, adopting, as you can see on the left, that familiar U-shaped block around a courtyard open to the street, but we then flipped the traditional location of the communal rooms and placed them directly on the high street. This enclosed a central garden court visible from the street. A second U-shaped block sits above this, facing the other way towards a raised garden, building higher on the high street to the north, stepping down to let the sun into the court from the south. A lot of our work involves the transformation of existing buildings. Here it was more the transformation of an idea. The idea of what form caring for older people in the city takes. We proposed a radical shift away from the various traditions and models of retreat, something closed to the broader community, where care takes the form of provision that is given, to a model that is open and increases the opportunities for sharing to foster mutual support. Within the conventional form and the intimate dimensions of this layout, we work with a social imagination to create a whole suite of places to encourage and support social encounter and help nurture individual confidence and grow a sense of collective living, sketching a set of spatial relations with a range of intimacy, from the doorstep of each apartment on these shared galleries. These are the very early sketches, organised around then this sort of sensual shared external room, which we called the garden court, which was open to the sky. And then alongside this was a generous collective hall, which we called the garden room, 2 stories high with daylight on its long edges. And by simply flipping the access gallery to the street side, the garden room gets more daylight and openness and gains a more intimate set of spaces overlooking the street, which is on the left of this image, slightly elevated to respond to the floodplain of the Thames. A large glazed porch, like a big bay window, pushes out to the street and houses the collective activities of the community groups and residents, so that residents can see and be seen, watching the world go by, but being part of it, embodying the idea of being present, of being visible and recognised, of existing. So we imagine the almshouse as a strong and simple form with a monolithic quality made of brick, broken open with a large cut of the garden room and light from the garden court at the interior, which is sort of centre to the right there. A mix of introvert and extrovert, robust but porous, domestic but civic. And this is a plan with the high street at the top of the page and the Victorian terraces running out the bottom of this drawing. And we embedded the almshouse in the Victorian greyness streets on this gentle bend of the meandering medieval lane at the edge of the floodplain. The brick volume folds in, which you can just about read at the top, against the curve of the street in a gesture of welcome. And the glazed porch pushes out to meet passers-by on foot and on the bus. There's a diversity of flats. There's 57 in total, 1 and 2 bed. 11 of those are wheelchair flats. And also in addition, there are 2 studio flats for researchers or young people to live on site. The step section ensures we can get sunlight penetrating deep into the garden court. So we've got the lower block to the south on the right, the garden court in the middle, the 2-storey room, and then the high street on the left. The galleries across the narrow sides of the court are offset in height, so homes don't overlap or overlook. Higher floor to ceiling heights lower down and lower floor to ceiling heights at the top where you get more light. So this is a building that celebrates and amplifies the idea of living in the city, unapologetically and emphatically, articulating the conditions of this high street into the lived experiences of domestic interiors, always conscious of its civic presence. The inflection against the curve in the high street allows us to push out the porch, which you can see at the front of the building. And then we have a set back top floor, which folds around the long, shallow bays. The top floor in timber construction allows the base to be more glazed. Lower floor to ceiling heights compensated with open joists to give a little bit more volume. And the long windows establish a strong relationship to the city and the layers of history lived by many residents in this community. The 2-storey bay windows you can see on ground and first floor anchor the building to the ground, extending the scale of Victorian terraces through to the high street. And these have got this special quality of really embedding the residents into the side streets, as you can see. But we recognise that life in the heart of the city is also intimate and reflective, dependent on the presence and connection to nature, the cycles of life and death, days and seasons. The interior is soft and yields to the external city pushing in. Water creates a soft acoustics. Clouds and shadows play tunes on the glazed screens. The communal roof terrace is like a shared balcony looking over the rooftops and chimneys, divided up into smaller rooms by a series of raised growing beds. The apartments are simple, but with generous windows providing beautiful light. They are 100% social rented at £215 per week, which includes the service charge. The glazed galleries also get abundant light, and the rhythms of the solid oak frame screens and quarry tiles extend the qualities of the garden deeper to the front doors of people's homes. Between the privacy of each home and the large shared garden room, there are multiple different corners to perch and chat. The roof terrace has a couple of king gardeners, but many more sunbathers. The cityscape always framing these experiences, the Victorian chimney pots and post-war blocks of flats, former homes. When Martin Craddock joined the charity as the chief exec, he picked up the idea of the ground floor cafe and garden room and transformed it. He proposed making the kitchen not a provision to serve meals to care receivers, but as a cookery school for exchange of skills and somewhere to grow confidence and friendship through making food together. The garden room is a place to share in this and show support, to play and debate, to learn new skills and share knowledge with younger generations. So, in summary, as tempting as it is to express the gravity of the housing crisis in numbers and to focus on the number of housing units produced, guiding us towards hyperdensity or industrialised production, what United St Saviour's have done is look at holistic solutions. By making older people's social housing aspirational, they've achieved what the bedroom tax didn't. 57 new apartments freeing up over 118 bedrooms in council or subsidised housing. It's equally tempting to jump from the ageing of the population to projections of rising expenditure on medicalised healthcare. The proposition here is mutual care. Grandparents looking after grandchildren after school, the younger old keeping an eye out for the older old. The saying goes that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, perhaps it takes a city, a community or an almshouse to enable dignified, active and joyful later life. A good life. Conceiving and creating social housing with the emphasis on social, allowing older people to make a fresh start with mutual support, growing a sense of purpose and a sense of dignity. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. Some of that was positively poetic. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I visited 2 or 3 times now, 3 or 4 times now, and it buzzes. Appleby Blue. It's full of the local community comes in and does all kinds of things. I went to a cookery lesson, full of people from within and without, and that the whole feel of the place is that this is a centre for the community at large, as well as a retreat for the occupiers. It combines both, and I love those glazed walkways, what we used to call deck access, reimagined. In a wonderful way, people meeting each other and sitting and talking and chatting, with the weather blocked off from what could be a miserable deck, but with glazing all the way down the sides and looking out over the gardens. Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much. And we're right on time too, so that's brilliant. Can we move on to another scheme, St Bede's in Bedford, where Fiona, you're going to share your experiences. Fiona MacLeod, who's a resident there. Age-friendly communities. How does it look from your perspective?
Having listened to that fascinating account of Appleby Blue, I'm not sure that St Bede's in Bedford is quite going to live up to the standard, but when it was built about 13 years ago now, it did win a lot of awards, and there are aspects of it which are certainly impressive in comparison with longer term built sheltered housing schemes. I've only been in the scheme now for just over 6 weeks, which is extraordinary. How I came to be there was that my background, which is in nursing, particularly of older people, and also social work, is have been always very concerned about people making decisions about whether they're to move or not early in their stage of life when they think it might be appropriate. The trouble is people do tend to put it off because the process of moving is so horrendous that they end up by perhaps reaching a point where they physically or mentally are not able to make that process. And then it's left to relatives, to friends even, to actually undertake and make decisions for them. So I decided, for various reasons, very good reasons. One was that I lived on the 2nd floor of a Victorian house with no lift, that actually it was getting to the point when I really did need to think of something else. And so I started looking around at various social housing around. I have to say it was very obvious very early on that St Bede's was a class above many of the others. The 3 I looked at were all much older schemes, some of them 30 or 40 years old, and much smaller, so that there was very little room for manoeuvre. If you went into a flat, you couldn't actually overtake someone who was trying to come out. St Bede's is very different. One of the striking things about it is that the corridors are wide, and a number of the residents do have motorised wheelchairs. So, you know, they rattle along quite happily, and it's well appointed from that point of view. But the other thing is, going into the flat, mine particularly has a very large hall, very good for manoeuvring wheelchairs. Not that I have a wheelchair yet, but you know, the time may well come. In proportion, it is excellent in that the main sitting room looks out over the garden. There is a very long balcony, the width of the flats, of the 3 rooms in the flat. And it looks out, as I say, over the garden, looking west towards the station, in fact, so you can hear the trains, which is quite nice. The kitchen is also quite big, and I've just visited someone else in another private scheme, and I noticed how small their kitchen was in comparison. The bedroom, it's the main bedroom, is a good size, and luckily has a fitted wardrobe, which was put in by the previous tenants. And then the bathroom is a wet room. And one of the nice things I have to say about it is the fact that it's got a very nice floor, a non-slip floor, which is quite interesting. It's something I hadn't quite appreciated how valuable that was. So having a wet room with a non-slip floor is a good benefit. The scheme itself is built actually on the site of an old school. It was what was called at that stage a middle school in Bedford, a Catholic school, and hence the name St Bede's. Some of the old buildings, the Victorian buildings, have been converted and sort of attached to the scheme itself. The majority of flats are in all new buildings and joined together, so it's very long. I haven't discovered it all yet. I've walked around it and I've been amazed at what a maze of collection of flats it is. There are over 100 flats there, but it's very difficult to appreciate that from just walking around or seeing people. The foyer at the front is very large, and behind it is a large area, social area, where people have meetings, group meetings. When the scheme was first opened, there was in fact a restaurant there. That has not, unfortunately, survived. Various attempts, I think, have been made to reinvigorate it, but at the present there isn't one. Nevertheless, the room is there, so that is also used for events, and there's equipment and cups and saucers and things like that there, which is good. There are a number of little places, and certainly as Stephen mentioned this, where you can sort of break out, have a little session with a group of chairs. But there's also another area, which is what's called the cinema room, which is also used for other things, like a yoga class each week online. And also there's a service there once a month. There's another area which is used for a coffee morning on a Wednesday. So there's quite a lot of different activities going on. And in fact, we've just been asked recently for ideas for more activities. And I'm not sure what will come out of that. One of the things I think I have to stress is that the process of arriving, the process of selling a flat and moving is very difficult, far more difficult than I remember the last time, which was 18 years ago. And I think this was partly because both flats, the one I was in and the one I moved into, were both owned by the housing associations, incidentally. But so I was a leaseholder, and that seemed to take a lot longer to process. But a lot of it, and my solicitors weren't in the town, they were in another town, was online. So you have to be fairly confident about being online and being able to do things on the computer to actually, achieve what you're wanting to do. So that's another interesting point, which hadn't really occurred to me when I set out on this course. Nevertheless, it was a painful process, and I got very stressed by it, which is quite unusual for me. But it did mean that at the end of it, and it's not the end yet, I thought, well, when I move, I'll be, I will be well. All is not well necessarily, because I've still got a lot of unpacking to do, sorting out, deciding where things can go in quite a small flat, certainly a lot smaller than my previous flat. Nevertheless, I think the thing I need to stress is that this concern for people to make decisions about their future housing as soon as they feel there might be a need for it. Not wait until they've got to the point when they can't manage, physically can't manage to actually get around and pack their clothes and do all those sorts of things, but is also physically, mentally can't manage the process of actually moving, working with solicitors and that sort of thing. And it would be, I think it's really important, because it's difficult to delegate this to someone else. And delegating it to your family is perhaps not the easiest thing to do, particularly as they're probably very busy with small children or older children. So I think at the moment, and it says only 6 weeks I've been here, I think it's been a successful move. I'm looking forward to getting much more involved in the social activities, and I'm really pleased, having seen alternatives, that really St Bede's is so spacious, so welcoming, and so full of, things going on, so social events. So I hope if you choose to do this, you've got somewhere similar to go to. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. You've done what we're all meant to do as older people, myself very much included. We ought to right size now while we're still fit and well, which you've
exactly.
done. But you remind us that it's a big thing to do. You take on a lot. It's a major effort. I know you're a shared owner, and shared ownership adds complexity rather than diminishes it. So, congratulations to you. But there's lessons for the rest of us, I think, on trying to make that passage easier, that transition easier, because we want people to do the right sizing, and we don't want to make it as difficult as it often is. So you're a great case study. Thank you very much for that. And now we move on to building an age-friendly city region. Guess where? Lessons from Greater Manchester. It's always Manchester. Nicola Waterworth, Greater Manchester Combined Authority. You're the strategic lead of the Ageing in Place initiative. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Lord Best. I've got some slides, so just with me while I share my screen. So yes, I am the strategic program lead with the Ageing Hub. So the Greater Manchester Ageing Hub is a cross-sector partnership. We're having our 10th birthday next year, and we're really partners coming together to meet and adapt to both the opportunities and challenges that an ageing population presents in Greater Manchester. We do that with our shared Greater Manchester Age Friendly strategy. That's a 10-year strategy that we've just entered the second year of, and I'm part of a core team at the Combined Authority who are convening the Ageing Hub. The main things that I wanted to cover today in the presentation are around, I want to focus on some of the learning from our Ageing in Place Pathfinder, in particular around what good quality involvement and partnerships with older people look and feel like from our learning, so we can understand what matters to them, and also touch on some key themes our work has raised around shaping the built environment, as well as some of what we're now doing in Greater Manchester around that. Our Ageing in Place Pathfinder was a 3-year, £4 million programme that was testing an innovative place-based model to support older people with social connection, improving the quality of life. It was targeted specifically spatially to tackle in those areas where there were experiencing social isolation, health and financial inequalities. It was a partnership of housing providers, voluntary and care organisations, and also we were working with Manchester Metropolitan University. At its heart, it was a co-production programme based really very simply in asking people living in those neighbourhoods what it was like for them to live there, how it could be better, and how they wanted to work together to improve the neighbourhood. We've refined an approach to doing that co-production and building partnerships with residents in those neighbourhoods, where it's about building trusted partnerships and doing inclusive engagement with all older people. Our work is with over 50, so people in mid and later lives probably more appropriate. Really building a shared understanding of what it is like in that place. So we have an approach where we're using spatial data about population health and outcomes, but importantly combining that with information about the physical environment, the local assets that are available, and also voice and lived experience. That is what our residents working with local stakeholders are using to undertake an action planning process that really prioritises place-specific responses for that particular neighbourhood. We're very much embedding the WHO age-friendly framework in that, so projects and activities across all 8 domains, and promoting community and older people's civic leadership within that work. That's a very systemized, simplified view of the process. I think it's really important when we're talking about doing engagement and involvement with older people well to recognise that that's in actual kind of reality. This, by necessity, is a much more creative, flexible approach that adapts to local circumstances and knowledge, and it's constantly evolving. This word cloud attempts to demonstrate kind of the frequency of different methods that were used to really create those conversations and understanding with residents in these neighbourhoods about what it was that mattered to them and they wanted to be different. Although I do think the best way to understand some of our work is to hear from people in those neighbourhoods. So I'm just going to play a very short film from our work in Brinnington in Stockport, for which I hope the sound is turned on.
When I first heard about the Pathfinder, I must admit I thought, another do-gooders coming telling us what to do. When they first came, I gave them hell. I wasn't the nicest person because thoroughly sick of people coming telling Brinnington what we needed. Bless them, they persevered, they kept coming back, and then they found out they were listening to us. They weren't telling us what we needed, they were listening, they were seeing what was doing, and they empowered us to do it better.
If you come in like a bull in a china shop and you think you're going to change the world, you've lost. You've lost straight away. You've lost your audience. You've lost trust. We've been very fortunate. I think it took us about 6 months to get the trust. But once you get the trust in the Brinnington community, not only do we feel that we work here, we feel like we're part of a family. We've been able to come in and help link a few things together, and it has been wonderful that a lot of the groups have, been supportive of us, and organisations like, Age UK, Life Leisure, they've all come on board with that, and the care homes and the schools. So we've been very fortunate with that.
It was all about really finding groups which are existing in Brinnington and propping them up to create some sustainability. We've created a space in the leisure centre and in the Lighthouse Church for people to come and do social activities, but physical activities as well.
It's made a massive difference to the residents, massive. They've been able to come out and about, and they've made some friends in the community as well, which is really good.
without us all working together, it wouldn't be able to happen. There's something going on every day of the week, you know, for the older population. We now see a lot of people coming through the doors, which a few years ago they would never have come into the centre.
We're saying goodbye to the Pathfinders, but we will keep things going, definitely. You can't start something like this and not keep it going, because the community won't let you. I mean, that's the answer. The community just won't let you. They put a smile in Burnington. I'll definitely say that, and I mean it. I'm not flanneling.
Fantastic Mary there, particularly from Bennington, who's one of our wonderful leaders in the work that we've been doing in the Pathfinder. So I hope that really gave a flavour. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes reflecting on specifically some of the learning and messages that we had around shaping the physical environment. Particularly, I think it's probably, I don't know if it's a surprise to people here, but the residents we are working with, the criticality of the physical environment of place to their social connection and healthy aging is clear to them. They understand that relationship and have views about what needs to change in their neighbourhood. The information and communication is a key theme across all of the work that we do in Age Friendly. I think one of my reflections is that also applies to place as well as the kind of what's happening. There's quite a bit about how you might navigate around a place, or if you know where things are located or where things are happening in place. And also that kind of digital and non-digital communications, if you want to get people involved, are key. I think we've already heard from the other speakers around the importance of communal space. Definitely having age-friendly space, that's social infrastructure in a neighbourhood where people can come, it is safe, it feels inclusive, and it is welcoming for social activities, but also to get support, advice and information. Walking and accessibility were key activities across all of our 10 neighbourhoods. We had older residents completing walking audits and assessments, working with highways departments and others to create improvements. But also walking groups, walking maps of local green spaces, and inevitably many benches. I think we're up to at least 35 benches that have been installed across those neighbourhoods to create outdoor spaces to be. Community safety, I'm sure we'll be surprised that's a key theme, both in terms of the design of space, so lighting or overgrown alleyways or walkways, but also a sense of shared use, particularly with younger people. So we did some great work in those spaces. And I think topography matters. One of our neighbourhoods, Ridge Hill, the clue is in the name, it is on a hill, and understanding what that means for access to health services and other amenities is really important to that community. It relates to transport, which obviously is also on here, and having a full dialogue about getting out and about in a place, but also to other places, is really important. And green spaces as well are key themes. I just want to finish up with some brief comments about where we're taking our work in Greater Manchester. We have a programme now following on from our Pathfinder called Live Well in Later Life. This is part of a much bigger Greater Manchester Live Well ambition to make sure everybody can get everyday support in their neighbourhood. And this work will help us make sure that that embeds an age inclusivity to it. And we will be particularly continuing working with our housing providers on that as well. We have a programme around housing first for an ageing population within our Greater Manchester strategy. A number of key pieces of work in them, including things like a right sizing framework, considering around home improvements and adaptations, and also the Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter and how that will make improvements for older people. I think Jeremy's mentioned that we have a housing planning and ageing group, which is a cross-sector partnership offering advice, information, and promoting our approaches to age-friendly design. Really hope be doing more with that group over the next year. And I think importantly, we're wanting to bring our learn information and place into the work that's happening around placemaking, regeneration, and development. So we can be designing in the physical environment, but also that engagement with older people from the outset of that kind of work. So that's a major ambition for us now. I will stop sharing the slides there.
Nicola, thank you very much. This is placemaking for later living, and that's an incredible example of what can be done with a bit of effort, a bit of excel, and then people can carry on without you. The Pathfinders, you leave behind a legacy which continues without you, which is just a wonderful example. Those Brinnington people were really great, inspiring. Thank you for all of that. And finally, Melissa Fernández, insights from Europe's collaborative housing models. You're part of the Collaborative Housing and Care in Europe project at Bristol University. Melissa.
Before I start, just wanted to mention that some of the co-editors of the publication that I'm going to be talking about now are here in the room, so they can possibly expand or provide nuance to what will be a very short presentation on the chat box while I'm speaking, if they feel like it. So let me open up this as presentation. All right. So I think most of the audience here will be at least somewhat familiar with what collaborative housing is, but just so we're kind of on the same page, these are resident, self-managed collective models, things like co-housing in particular that are covered in this book, but there's also cooperatives, CLTs, and other models that offer really concrete alternatives to privatized and pressurized social care models and housing systems, while also, and this is particularly true to senior co-housing, disrupting the more dominant cultural imaginaries of how people will age, where they will live in later life, and who is going to be looking after them. And their design actually resonates and contains a lot of the principles that we just heard about from Appleby Blue, including shared communal spaces, which are at the core of collaborative housing projects. And what we found in producing the book is that despite a lot of research happening over the last 10 years or so, the HAPPI reports talking about different collaborative senior housing models as well, from different angles, the minutia of how social care over the life course is actually designed, how it's practiced, how it's experienced, how it's organized and distributed by older people themselves living in these projects had rarely really been explored in any of the phases of the project's development. So we focus on these subtleties in the project, and we do that by bringing together research, but also practitioner voices that talk about examples of informal and formal social care within purpose-built projects. And we feature projects that are both in the planning phases and in the live-in phases, that are both senior and intergenerational, although the majority of them are senior. And they come from 5 different countries. So we have England, Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, and France. France has 2 chapters. Spain also has 2 chapters. And because I have very little time today, I'm just going to focus a little bit, give you a snippet of the lessons and the tensions and the contradictions that we hear about, particularly in the European cases of the book, where we do see a little bit more interaction or more integration with formal care services than we do in the UK, where it's more informal social care, mutual aid practices that are the kind of predominant modalities of community care. So what we need to understand first is that why and how communities decide to integrate formal care into the community or not to integrate it often has to do with these dominant ideas or imaginaries that exist around age and aging. So on the one hand, that there's this notion of a third age, right? The young old, where one reaches retirement in good health, allowing for a post-retirement lifestyle that is relatively unburdened by age, whereas the fourth age is quite the opposite. It represents a vision of decline, frailty, where there's this fear of aging without agency, of having little to no say over where one will live or being placed in institutional care. So something like what Fiona was describing earlier, of that moment of option recognition, which is something that Professor Sheila Pease has written about as well. In many projects, we see how groups are designing schemes actually motivated by a desire to ward off that fourth age decline and to live their best third age, with very clear policies that say that one must move on if care needs become too great. And what's interesting there is that even though we found very strong evidence of forward planning through a range of collective arrangements and informal support practices, there was mostly a reluctance to address the potential issues around care, because there's a kind of sense in which designing for or procuring care services for a collective is kind of at odds with the ethos of co-housing as a space for active aging or for third agers, if you will. So in many of these cases, what we see is that the physical design ends up being very successful in terms of not having any hint of institutionalization, but also having very little scope for on-site adaptability or professional care in the future. So there are projects that are featured in the book that do make provisions to support themselves during frailty and dependency, and I want to talk about those now. So in the Barcelona case, for example, that's called Can 70. That's a project that's a senior co-housing project that is getting built as we speak. They were supported financially and institutionally by the Barcelona municipality and its Department of Social Affairs, because the government at that time was working really hard on instituting a new community care policy. And what happened there is that in order for them to get any kind of subsidy for the land, the group was required to address care more formally during an entire year of their co-design process. And they actually had to create and publish a kind of care guide about how they were going to do that. And their plan ended up incorporating economic management models for care services, where they were going to manage the care workers directly. They designed an assisted living unit on site so that those that came to major dependency could stay at home regardless of their care needs, while keeping the design of the homes really home-like. In the Netherlands chapter, we see what they called a clustered living approach, which is based on a traditional courtyard Dutch architecture. And that was developed in collaboration between some social entrepreneurs and housing associations. And the dwellings here that are adapted for future healthcare needs are developed and facilitated and co-managed by this private foundation called Narrenhof, and a community manager that they hire to work in close and continuous collaboration with its future residents. And the residents themselves have to be the initiators of the projects. They are the ones to have to organize a group and then come to the foundation to ask them to be the developers of these projects. Of course, the dangers of these kinds of senior co-housing groups in particular is that the material envelope of the scheme could end up becoming a bit too much like the feared institutional environment that they're trying to counteract. So design is really critical. And these are just two of the examples that where they are trying to successfully address that issue. In another senior co-housing community in Madrid that is called Travensol, they have been living there for quite a few years already. And that group also designed in extra care units or care units for greater dependency needs. And they contract collectively their social care workers, they employ them, and they pay for them. And this chapter details an interesting case of a resident who was part of a couple who developed Alzheimer's while living there, moved into one of the assisted living units that they had designed on site, while his wife remained in the flat where they had been living before, and she was very present in the everyday care and managing of the care workers. But the workers themselves were not accustomed to providing care in that kind of collaborative environment, and they did not like the level of control that residents were taking. So there was a clash there between this culture of autonomous self-management of the collective and the institutional models of social care. In Sweden, however, we see a very different case where communities that have been established actually since the late 70s, senior co-housing communities, home care services actually learned from the informal care work that they experienced in these communities. They were very happy to kind of adapt their own working practices to the group's culture of mutual support, and to then bring those lessons back to their institutional environment. So there was kind of a learning loop or circle or cycle that was going on here between formal and informal care systems. Now, one of the things that we learned from these examples that I mentioned, and there are many more in the book, is that it's really important for communities to consider the financial implications of physical adaptations and the social support that is required from them over time from the very beginning of the development of the project. An intergenerational approach like the one that is featured here in this slide that comes in chapter 7 from France is one of the ways where financial and social sustainability is considered in relation to these issues. But of course, senior groups also have younger and older members, so they have multiple generations contained within. We also see that when outside public and private actors get involved, like the case in Barcelona that I mentioned, the case in the Netherlands, the incorporation of care design is more likely. So a tentative conclusion is that perhaps if we leave the design to future residents alone, they are less likely to incorporate the physical facilities that they're going to need in the fourth age. But the Madrid case study also shows us that managing dependency isn't just a financial issue. It's not just a social issue. It's not just an architectural issue. It's a multifaceted issue that requires finding balance between economic sustainability with good provision of care that is adapted and respectful to the person, but also with solidarity and mutual assistance, with individual and collective freedom. So that balance requires constant review by the community. And in all of the countries, what we find is that this possibility of continuously adapting, of continuously negotiating and changing your practices over time is really contingent on the strength of the community bonds, on the circuits of informal co-caring and the kind of neighborly interdependencies that develop over time in these communities. So to conclude, collaborative housing is challenging the distinction between home and care homes and the traditional dichotomous imaginaries that we have of autonomy and decrepitude that are associating traditionally to those models. They are actively blurring those boundaries while also practicing new non-familial interdependencies. To be very clear, we are not arguing that collaborative housing is a replacement for family or institutionalized formal care. In fact, in all of the countries, family really did continue to play a really present and important role when care needs became very acute, and institutions as well. But it's certainly a complement, right? A model perhaps for connecting to social care. Finally, the book calls for greater deinstitutionalized approach to care in two ways. So care as an ethic and as an approach to life that is dispersed across a community and embedded in its physical fabrics, in shared spaces, in common rooms, in gardens, in shared services like care services, and common meals and so forth, but also where care can be understood as a community-based ecosystem, where services are organized not kind of singularly by any one project alone, but by neighborhoods, in collectives, and in connections with other groups. And two final critical issues I wanted to mention for the future-proofing of collaborative housing are issues that we know: long-term dedicated public funding on the one hand, and also importantly, the breakdown of what are still the existing kind of silos between the housing and social care systems that need to happen if we're going to imagine these spaces in the UK in the way that other examples that I've shown here have done. And there are chapters in the book that are in conversation with practitioners precisely around these kind of practical issues of how to do that in regulatory terms, in legislative terms, in policy terms, etc. So thanks very much for listening. I invite you all to buy a Christmas present for yourself, which can be this book. You can put your phones on this little QR code here if you are interested. There's a code at the top of this slide, DSC.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And also it's in the chat. That's
Yes,
the link
perfect.
to your book. Great stuff. Collaborative housing models, really interesting. Now we've just got time for a couple of questions. I think, Jeremy, you've been studying the Q&A list. Have you got to the top of your list a couple that we can pick out?
Yeah, let's just start with Stephen. Thanks very much for a wonderful presentation. A few questions for you about the types of grant funding that are available there. Another one about whether the accommodation where researchers can live there, whether there's also a way for guest flats as well. So any update? I know Lizzie's with us this afternoon from United St Saviour's and is currently in Appleby Blue. But any thoughts you have on that would be great, or any knowledge you have on that in terms of the funding model and also that sort of involvement of community researchers.
Funding model was reasonably straightforward, and I think it covers a few of the questions that I saw. It was the almshouse was developed under a section 106, which means private development, a private developer and a development near Tate Modern realised a number of private flats, and Appleby Blue is the off-site social provision. So it's a local authority site and local authority planning requirement for affordable housing. It's 100% social, rented. And so the developer paid for the site and for most of the building. About 25% of the cost was paid for by the charity, no mayor's funding. what that and then that meant all the unit sizes are standard 1-2 bed. The 2 beds are slightly bigger because of the corner arrangements and the wheelchair provision, but generally standard. Yeah, I think, and in terms of costs, overall, I think it was benchmarked against social housing because it's public money if you then exclude the charities. But we added in a number of other kind of amenities. And someone asked why it took a long time. Well, for the same reason. It's an enlightened approach, but it only happens when the developer's ready for it to happen. And if the developer doesn't want to develop their site, you don't get your social infrastructure provided. So that's why it took a long time. We had 3 years waiting for something to kind of move on that private development.
Thanks, Stephen. I think you've covered sort of Neil and Rob's questions as well there. Just in terms of the visitors, Marianne asked the question, can people visit? I believe United St Saviour's will be announcing in the new year a programme of visits and arranging something to be made publicly available. And please do watch out, and we'll promote those nearer the time. Lots of great questions come through, Richard, and also congratulations and thumbs up for many of us, or all our speakers. There's one particular one, and this is not just for Appleby Blue, but this is more broadly around from Sheila about reflecting the culture and faith needs of residents. Fiona, can I kick off with you, and then any thoughts on that? You are, after all, in St Bede's.
Yes, I am in St Bede's, which was Catholic. As I did mention, we do have a monthly service, communion service, taken by someone who is a reader, one of the residents, who is a reader at the local St Paul's Church, which is the church in the centre of Bedford. I mean, I myself actually go to another church in Bedford, but I haven't yet discovered whether there's other opportunities for other groups to meet in that sort of way, other faiths to meet. And predominantly, as far as I can see, the residents are predominantly English white. But no, there are other people here as well.
Well, I think it's really important to reflect that diversity. Nicola, you might have a view, because I know GM have done a lot of work on this.
Yeah, I was going to say we've been really looking. There's some work by University of Manchester, particularly focused on the role of faith-based organisations in developing age-friendly communities, and I think we've been lucky about able to work with those researchers and put that in practice. But I would say those faith-based organisations in our very local neighbourhoods are absolutely critical. They're often the only social infrastructure that there is in a space, and welcoming a kind of wider community. So I think, off the top of my head, I do think within probably all of our neighbourhoods there has been quite considerable involvement from local faith-based organisations to really get involved.
Richard, as we draw to a close, can I just pick up on a couple of questions and cluster those, which include, I think, one you might be interested in, which is about how, outdated housing, how can we regenerate that? And I know that was something you were very passionate about in terms of former inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have got an awful lot of 1960s, 1970s bed sits, tiny places. It's no good. We can't expect this to last. We have to now regenerate, knock two into one, maybe redevelop the whole place. We've got to get back into this and not expect people to accept standards that really are outdated. Yes, that's been a big reaction to our report. I think it's struck a nerve, and we have to get on top of that. It requires investment, but we often will get more homes out at the end of the day than we started with at the beginning. So there's gain. We're getting land for free in developing and redeveloping sites. But a big issue for tomorrow. Can I just say in closing, Jeremy, I constantly worry that the government is not taking older people's housing seriously enough. The task force report not getting enough attention. A lot of local authorities not giving enough attention to older people's housing, despite the demographic statistics. And then you get a session like this, which shows why we should be putting in the effort, why government should be paying attention, why local authorities should put in the kind of effort that we're hearing about in the Greater Manchester Authority. So great stuff. Really grateful to all the speakers.
Can I thank you as well, because I think we're going to have to draw it to a close, because we've just past 5 o'clock, and I know we need to sort of pull it together in the next minute or two. On behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank you, Lord Best, for co-hosting and co-chairing this afternoon's session with 4 fabulous speakers. I'm sure you will agree. Can I also thank the team behind the scenes for putting on this HAPPI Hour, but also all the HAPPI Hours, all 130 plus of them that we've now managed to hold. We're also working on next year's programme, which will kick off in April, probably, to coincide with Intergenerational Week. And so we'll pick up with Richard again how we can sort of kick off the new HAPPI Hour series, looking at the then hopefully recently published APPG inquiry report. But if you can't wait till then and you want to join us, do watch out for 2 annual conferences that we'll be hosting in the spring. The first in Newcastle on the 24th of February, and the second in London, in Bristol on the 12th of March. Further details will be made available early in the new year for registration, but we very much look forward to showcasing more great examples from around the country and in those regions next year. But all it leaves me to say is to thank Richard, Stephen, Fiona, Nicola, Melissa, and there's Sally as well, for an excellent HAPPI Hour session this afternoon. Thank you. Lots of appreciation and fantastic reactions from the delegates as well. Season's greetings, and see you next year.
Happy Christmas.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.